One of the biggest myths about computers that's out there in the world today is that computers are environmentally friendly. I have been told in many staff meetings that I should have students use Google Docs as opposed to writing their essays out by hand because it's much better for the environment to use Google Docs than it is to use paper. I'm pretty sure I will be able to convince you otherwise by the end of this presentation. So, first thing to be aware of is that every phase of the computer's life cycle is terrible for the environment: the production, the use, and the disposal. What you should be aware of about a computer and what's inside it is that basically every metal you've ever heard of is inside the computer somewhere to do something. Maybe in quite small portions, but they're in there. Something to remember for when I start talking about recycling is that take a look at this screen here and you can see that we've got plastic and metal and all this stuff all welded together. That's going to make it really hard to recycle. But again, what I want you to remember here is that we need all these different kinds of metals inside the computer. So, metals have to be mined. And the thing about mines is that they can be very environmentally costly. You can see this open pit mine involved extensive deforestation. There's definitely, the forest is gone now. And the other thing is that the metal comes inside rocks. And so the metal has to be extracted out of the rocks. And that is often done through acids and some other things which can be quite toxic. In fact, when you're trying to pull out those metals, you're actually using a whole bunch of fossil fuels to heat up things and do various stuff. And you're also using water to help produce these products. So this little teeny tiny microprocessor inside your computer is actually using quite a quantity of water and quite a quantity of fuel just to produce it. Another thing that's come up recently is the metal coltan. And coltan is something that is used to cool your cell phone. And the place where it's mined, one of the big places it's mined actually, is in Africa, in the Congo region. And it's in the region where actually gorillas live. And it's causing a lot of problems. So when I was in the Toronto Zoo, they have a whole bunch of signs up. These are from the Toronto Zoo. And people were actually looking at me like I was a crazy person because instead of watching the gorillas, I was taking pictures of the signs about saving the apes by saving your cell phones. But they had some really great pictures. And so this picture is of a coltan mine in the Congo, and it's in the mountain region. And you can see how rough the conditions are in this area. And the miners are actually often forced to mine there. There's some really awful conditions there. But another issue is that they don't have a lot of resources. So one thing that's happening here, you can see through the deforestation, that's simply removing the gorilla's habitat for these mines. But another thing that's happening is that these miners have such awful living conditions that they're hunting whatever they can. And one of the things that they're hunting is these gorillas. So we have these endangered species that are actually, the miners, they need to eat something, and that's what they're eating there. So a very, very sad situation. There's a huge campaign on through a series of things like the Jane Goodall Foundation as well has been involved in this. And they're trying to get people to recycle their cell phones so that the metals, the coltan specifically, can be recycled out of your phone, and we can stop the deforestation and stop the hunting of the gorillas in those regions. They have like a drop box at the zoo. I'm not sure anybody brings their cell phone with them to the zoo to recycle, but I think it's a nice thing to help us kind of remember while we're there what they're thinking about. So after we've mined out these things causing deforestation, loss of habitat for endangered species, really horrific living conditions for some of the miners, all those sorts of things, you then get your brand new wonderful cell phone. And so then what do? Of course, you go online. And when you go online, you're connecting to these companies with really large data centers. So companies like Google and Oracle, Microsoft and Snapchat, any of your social media, anything like that, has a huge center where they have all of the files that you have stored. These data centers might be as big as the school, and they're filled with hardware. Hardware that uses metals like the ones we've been talking about. So there's a huge use of mined resources there. There's also a huge energy cost, which I'll talk about more. Another thing which you should think about is streaming, because streaming has been a huge change in the way we use energy. When I was a little girl, we used to, well, I guess when I was a little girl, we didn't download things because we were still using cassette players. But okay, so when I was slightly older and we started downloading music, we used to download it directly to our computer or to our iPod or whatever. And then we would listen to it from that device. But that doesn't happen anymore. In fact, I don't think you guys have ever done that recently. You'll be doing something like listening to Spotify. And when you listen to Spotify, not just your computer runs, but also all of the servers between you and the Spotify server, and all of the routers between you and the Spotify server, and all of the wires are connecting you up. So think about all that additional hardware. Instead of just running one computer to play the song, we're now running hundreds of computers to play the song. And while we're sharing some of those hundreds of computers amongst many users, it's way more computers than we used to run to play music or to play video or to play those kinds of things. You've probably heard about the Netflix traffic that we've used over the COVID-19 crisis and how much internet resources have been devoted to that. One of the things that that has meant is a huge energy increase. So these statistics are from Greenpeace. And in 2010, 2% of the world's electricity, that's in total, all of the electricity being used in the world was used just by the data centers. So that's not including you using your computer at home or anything like that. That's just data centers. And that increased 7 years later to 5%. And Greenpeace is predicting that it's going to be 20% by 2025 of the world's electricity will be used by these data centers. That's a fifth, which is kind of crazy to me. I understand that the COVID-19 crisis has helped us meet this target because there's been such an increase in the use of data centers. And so that's hugely increased our use of electricity. And another statistic I had heard that was really kind of neat is that simply Bitcoin mining, so nothing else, just mining Bitcoins, they think it's using roughly the electricity as what's needed to run the country Denmark, which I thought was kind of ridiculous because that's not a very big task. Anyways, another neat statistic I found was that the data centers in the United States are using the power from 10 large nuclear power plants, which is crazy to me. After we had studied the blaster virus and that the power had gone down in Ontario, and the Bruce Nuclear Power Development, that's one power center, it ran a bunch of Ontario off of those generators. The fact that they're using 10 generators when one of them ran a chunk of Ontario by itself is kind of nuts. This is a lot of energy that is going into these streaming services and that is going into the data centers. The big worry with Greenpeace is that as everybody has been moving online and as people have been making Google Docs as opposed to saving things to their computer and everything runs off the internet, that this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. It's one of the big environmental issues that's facing us with the increase of computers. So you've mined the resources for your device, and then you've used your device and sucked up all kinds of resources there. But then you, of course, throw it away because you need to get a new one. And when you throw away your computer, it becomes e-waste. And e-waste has a number of issues associated with it. First of all, it's toxic. So if you look at what's inside the computer, I picked out some particularly fun toxins. I don't know. So lead, for example, which is used in computers, it can cause neurological damage, central nervous system damage. It's dangerous to your unborn children, and it can cause reproductive problems. Beryllium, which is used in circuit boards, causes respiratory problems. Hexavalent chromium, which is my favorite because I just think that sounds crazy, causes DNA damage, and it's carcinogenic. I would assume those are related, but also kidney and liver damage. And then the cadmium in batteries are really, 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 really toxic, like really toxic. They cause all kinds of things, but certainly kidney damage and heart and respiratory problems. But not just these devices, having the metals inside your computers cause these sorts of things as well. So throwing your computer out or your e-waste or your toaster or anything with electronics in it or metals inside it in your regular garbage, you're actually throwing away toxic things into the dump. And that's quite a big issue. So I want to talk a little bit about how landfills work to talk about why that's a problem. So, what happens in a landfill is they have this liner on the bottom of the landfill, and then they put in a bunch of the garbage, and they'll have a series of uh, this one shows gas recovery systems and things like that as the garbage puts things out, and then they cover it over the top. And one of the things that's really critical is this liner on the bottom because that catches all the toxins, and it's called leachate in a landfill. It catches all the rainwater that comes in there, and then the rainwater has to be pulled out. So think about this. You've thrown away your cell phone. Your cell phone has a whole bunch of metal in it, which is toxic. The rain falls on the landfill, goes through the waste, and goes near your phone and picks up all those toxins, which are then in the leachate water system. So, in this way, by just throwing away your cell phone into the dump or throwing away your e waste into the dump, you're contaminating our water supply because the water has to come out of the dump at some point. And this process is quite dangerous. Yeah, that's another section. So they have a whole bunch of leachate ponds near landfills where they clear them out. And they can clear out simple toxins really easily, but the ones that I'm talking about that are coming off e-waste and off your batteries are really hard to get out. And yeah, you can imagine the processing that's involved and the amount of money that's involved. And we just would like drinking water to be safe. That would be nice. So that the leachate that comes off the landfill isn't poisoning everything around it. So the District of Peel, the region of Peel, has a whole bunch of ways that you can throw away your waste efficiently. So I'm sure you have a green bin, or you've at least seen them, and there's yard waste, and there's your recycling bin, or you've at least seen them, and there's garbage bin. But there's also something called a CRC, and that is the Community Recycling Center, and I'll show you a little bit about that. But there's also a whole bunch of e-waste drop-off centers. So you can go online and look them up. There's one at Staples right by our school where you can just drop off your e-waste there, and they make sure it's responsibly recycled and that it isn't taken into the dump. What I often tend to do is I tend to kind of build up my e-waste, and then what I do is I actually go down to the dump. So this is the one, I think it's by Chrysler Drive. And I'm driving into you can see there's a sign right there, and there's the recycling center over here. And so you drive in, and what happens is there's a scale right here. So your car drives on top of the scale, and they ask you what you have to drop off. So one thing you can do is this is the hazardous waste drop off, and this is where you can put your batteries and your light bulbs, and that's free. And then, here's a better thing of the scale. So you can see you drive your car on the scale and it can weigh your whole car as you go in. And then you tell the people as you come in, you tell them that you're there to drop off e-waste, and they say, okay, cool. So then you go in and you're on top of this huge platform, and you go over to the section where TVs and monitors and e-waste are all here. And they have you place them in this spot, and they have you throw away your e-waste. And then there's people there who go through them and pull out the batteries. And then they throw them over the edge in these huge bins. And here's another picture kind of where you can see the edge. You're up 2 stories actually, and you're throwing things out over the edge to do this. And then you go out and you drive out, and they weigh your car on the way out, and that's how they can tell how much you threw away. And the thing is that if you're throwing away e-waste and only e-waste, you don't have to pay for it at all. It's free because you've recycled it. You've done so many good things for the environment that they're quite happy about that. So that's kind of another way you can throw it out. So if you have little pieces, take it to like one of the local centers like Staples. And if you have a whole bunch of it, you can take it to the dump in the community recycling center, and you can throw it away responsibly there. So, in summary, your computer causes problems when you're mining the metals. It causes problems when you're sucking up a ton of energy to run it and to run all the servers that are required to run your computer. And then when you throw it away, it is toxic waste, which requires special treatment of the leachate from the dump and special recycling processes that are very expensive to separate out the metal from the plastic. So the final thought is, when I'm being told that using a Google Doc is more environmentally friendly than writing something down on a piece of paper, I want you to think about all of the things that get involved in that Google Doc. And I want you to think about the fact that the piece of paper is recyclable, easily recyclable. It's not melded together with anything else. And also, it comes from a renewable resource. We can replant trees and regrow them. It's really hard to grow like copper. Anyways, so just think about when you're using computers and when you think you need to buy a new cell phone, think about how you can dispose of your old one responsibly and maybe hold on to your cell phone a bit longer. Okay, good luck with your Google form.